The air in Mr. Sterling's office was thick, heavy with the scent of old paper and the cloying sweetness of stale lilies, remnants from the funeral 2 days prior. I watched David's jaw clench, a muscle twitching furiously, as Sarah dramatically dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue that remained suspiciously pristine. They hadn't exchanged a civil word since we walked through the door. I knew this meeting, the reading of Dad's will, would be a disaster. But I had no idea it would unravel everything. I'm Martha, and at 42, I thought I'd seen the worst of my family's drama. My father, Thomas Miller, had passed peacefully in his sleep, a blessing after years of quiet decline. We were in his attorney's dark, wood-paneled office, an ornate grandfather clock ticking loudly in the corner, marking time in an almost mocking rhythm. Dad had always been the quiet strength, the anchor for our often stormy family. He was the kind of man who measured his words, and frankly, his affection, which always felt scarce. What I didn't know was that his final act would be the loudest, most profoundly shocking statement of his life. Everything I believed about our family, about our past, and about his true feelings was about to shatter into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. This wasn't just about money. It was about the unspoken truths buried beneath years of silence and assumptions. Mr. Sterling, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weariness of human conflict, cleared his throat. He adjusted his spectacles, the only sound for a long moment being the persistent tick-tock of the clock and Sarah's theatrical sniffles. He held up a thick manila envelope, its seal broken. "I have here Mr. Thomas Miller's last will and testament, dated 5 years ago." He began to read in a monotone voice, rattling off legal jargon about executors and assets. My gaze drifted from his placid face to my siblings. David, my older brother, 45 and perpetually stressed, sat rigid, his eyes narrowed, already calculating. He ran Dad's old construction business, or rather had taken over Dad's old construction business, and acted as if he owned every brick and beam the moment Dad's health started failing. He believed he was entitled to the lion's share simply for keeping the company afloat, as he often reminded us. He never mentioned how Dad had set it up so perfectly or how much help he had always received. Sarah, my younger sister, 38, was a whirlwind of manufactured fragility and sharp-edged ambition. She had always been Dad's little princess, or at least that's how she presented herself. Her life had been a string of failed ventures and lavish spending, always expecting Dad to bail her out. She saw this will as her ultimate lottery win, her long-overdue reward for simply existing. And then there was me, the middle child. The peacemaker, the invisible one, the one who always tried to hold things together while everyone else pulled them apart. I loved my father, truly, despite the emotional distance that had always characterized our relationship. But I had no illusions about my standing in this family. I was the one who listened, who nodded, who was expected to understand. And I was tired of it. My heart was heavy with grief for Dad, but also with a weary resignation for the battle I knew was coming. Mr. Sterling continued, detailing Dad's primary assets, the old colonial house we grew up in, a sizable investment portfolio, and the construction company itself. The words hung in the air, each one a trigger. When he got to the distribution, David leaned forward, a predatory glint in his eyes. Sarah's sniffing stopped completely, her head snapping up, alert as a predator. To my son, David Miller, I bequeath the Miller Construction Company, its assets, and all associated properties, given his continued dedication and management. David let out a small, satisfied grunt, a sound that grated on my nerves. Of course, the company was always his. This was no surprise. He had practically lived there since he was a teenager, and it was a given that it would pass to him. But the way he looked at Sarah and me, a smug smirk beginning to form on his lips, made my blood boil. It was the look of someone who had won, and he always had to make sure you knew it. Mr. Sterling paused, taking a sip of water. My stomach churned. This was the moment. The house. The money. What would be left for us, the forgotten children? And to my daughters, Martha and Sarah Miller, he resumed, his voice even, the remainder of my estate. including the family home at 14 Willow Creek Lane, and all financial investments, shall be divided equally between them. The words were simple, yet they landed in the room like two separate thunderclaps. Sarah gasped, a genuine sound of shock this time. Equally? What do you mean equally? Dad always said. He promised me. Her voice rose, shrill and indignant, instantly stripping away her demure act. She rounded on me, her eyes flashing. You manipulative witch! What did you do to him? I stared back, utterly stunned. What? Sarah, I didn't do anything. What are you even talking about? My voice was low, but it vibrated with a rising anger. I had tried to be the bigger person for so long, to keep the peace. But this accusation, just moments after our father's will was read, was a fresh wound. David slammed his fist on the armrest of his chair. This is ridiculous. I've put in 30 years of my life. That house should be mine, or at least a bigger share of the investments. Martha, you live 5 states away. You never visit. What right do you have? He turned his fury on me, his face reddening. His words were a familiar sting. You never visit. It wasn't true, but it was always his weapon. Excuse me? I shot back, my own composure finally cracking. My hands were shaking, and I gripped them tightly in my lap. I visit plenty. And I called him every week. You barely let him get a word in edgewise when you did call. What about all those loans he gave you, David, to keep your dedication and management afloat? Those were investments in the family business. He roared, standing up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. The company that generates the wealth for all of us? You think this money just grew on trees, Martha? I worked for it. You two just sat back and waited for Dad to hand you everything. Sarah was now fully in hysterics, real tears streaming down her face. He promised me the house. He said it would be mine, Martha. You were always his favorite, you just pretend not to be. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. Favorite? Are you kidding me? My voice was sharp, laced with years of suppressed frustration. If you were in my shoes, listening to the constant criticism, feeling like I was never quite good enough, always just there, you wouldn't call that being a favorite. You were the princess, Sarah, the one he showered with gifts and money every time you cried broke. Mr. Sterling held up his hand, his expression unchanged, a testament to his experience with grieving families and their predictable explosions. Please, a moment. There's more. His calm voice cut through the chaos, momentarily silencing David and Sarah's histrionics. They both glared at me, then at him, their faces contorted with a mixture of greed and fury. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady my racing heart. This was exactly what I'd expected, what I'd dreaded. The vultures picking at the bones, even before the ground had settled over Dad's grave. It was a familiar and disgusting tableau, and the pain of it, mixed with my raw grief, was almost unbearable. As per your father's wishes, Mr. Sterling continued, unfazed by the tension, there is an additional directive. A series of personal letters. He reached into the same manila envelope and pulled out a stack of neatly bound cream-colored envelopes. Each one was sealed with a wax stamp bearing Dad's distinct, old-fashioned initial, M. My heart gave a strange flutter. This was unexpected. Dad was not one for grand gestures, and certainly not for written confessions. David scoffed. Letters? What is this, some kind of scavenger hunt? Just get to the point, Mr. Sterling. Is there more money or not? Sarah sniffled again, suddenly interested. What kind of letters? Is it about his secret stash? Did he hide gold coins or something, Martha? She turned to me, her eyes wide, momentarily forgetting her anger. This was typical Sarah, always dreaming of some hidden treasure. I shook my head slowly, my gaze fixed on the letters in the lawyer's hand. There was something about them, the way they were carefully bound, the elegant wax seal that felt profoundly out of character for the reserved man I knew as my father. It sparked a strange unease in me, a cold premonition. These are personal letters, Mr. Sterling explained patiently, addressed individually and some collectively. Your father instructed that they be read in order at the conclusion of the will reading, after all other matters have been clarified. He paused, looking at each of us. He specified they are to be read out loud, by me, in your presence. David crossed his arms, leaning back with an exaggerated sigh. Fine, fine. Let's get this over with. Another one of Dad's dramatic flourishes, I suppose. He rolled his eyes. My dad, dramatic? That was the last word anyone would use to describe him. He was pragmatic, stoic, often distant. This felt off. Mr. Sterling selected the top letter from the stack. It was addressed simply, to my children. He broke the seal carefully, the sound of the cracking wax unnervingly loud in the silent room. He unfolded the thick paper, smoothed it out, and began to read, his voice now taking on a softer, more reflective tone than the legal monotone he had used for the will. My dearest David, Martha, and Sarah, he began. The words, hearing them in Dad's voice, even through the lawyer, sent a fresh wave of grief washing over me. It felt like he was there, speaking to us from beyond the grave. If you are hearing this, then I am no longer with you. I imagine you've already had your first quarrel over the division of my earthly possessions. Such is the way of families, I suppose, especially ours. A humorless chuckle escaped David's lips. Told you he was dramatic, he muttered. Sarah shot him a dirty look, but her attention was clearly rapt. I confess, it brings me little peace to imagine the arguments you are having, Mr. Sterling continued, reading Dad's words. I spent my life working, building, and providing what I believed was a secure future for you all. But I've come to realize, perhaps too late, that the greatest inheritance I could leave you is not measured in dollars or property. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not the Dad I knew. The pragmatic man, the numbers man, suddenly talking about things not measured in dollars. This was unsettling. David looked puzzled, his calculating eyes squinting, trying to find the angle. Sarah, meanwhile, had a wistful expression, as if Dad was about to reveal a hidden treasure map. These letters, Mr. Sterling read on, are an attempt to rectify some of my past mistakes, to tell you things I should have said, to explain actions I took, and to shed light on truths I kept hidden. They are my final words, my legacy, and I pray they bring you understanding, if not peace. The room was absolutely silent now, save for the steady tick of the clock. David's smugness had evaporated, replaced by a frown of confusion. Sarah had stopped dabbing her eyes, her tissue forgotten in her lap. My own heart was pounding, a strange mix of dread and a desperate, almost yearning curiosity. What mistakes? What truths? What had he kept hidden? To understand the true meaning of my will, the lawyer read, his voice gaining a solemnity that mirrored the gravity of the words. You must first understand where we came from. Not just as a family, but as individuals shaped by unspoken burdens. My first letter is for all of you, but particularly for a past that defined us more than any of us truly understood. It concerns a secret, a very old secret, that I carried alone for far too long. My breath hitched in my throat. A secret? Dad had secrets? Our family had always been private, yes, but secrets suggested something else entirely. Something darker, deeper. The lawyer paused, allowing Dad's words to sink in, the weight of them pressing down on us. Then, Mr. Sterling began to read the details of the first secret, his voice dropping slightly, imbued with an unexpected tenderness. When your mother, Eleanor, and I were first married, there were struggles you never knew. Financial struggles, yes, but also a deep personal one. We longed for children, but for years we couldn't conceive. Your mother, bless her heart, yearned for a family with a ferocity I still remember vividly. The doctors told us it was unlikely, almost impossible, that we would ever have children of our own. My mind reeled. This was not the fairy tale origin story I'd been told. I knew my parents had married young, that Dad had worked hard to build his company, and that they had us, David first, then me, then Sarah. But never, not once, had I heard anything about fertility struggles. My mother, beautiful and kind, had never mentioned it. It was as if this part of their life simply didn't exist. David shifted uncomfortably. What's this got to do with anything? It's ancient history. He sounded dismissive, but I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't known either. But your mother was resilient, Mr. Sterling continued, reading Dad's steady hand. She refused to give up. After years of disappointment, a glimmer of hope appeared. A young woman, barely out of her teens, in a difficult situation. She was alone, scared, and carrying a child she couldn't keep. Your mother, with her immense heart, saw an opportunity, a chance to fulfill her deepest wish and to help someone in desperate need. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A young woman, a child she couldn't keep? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the words, the implications. It couldn't be what I was thinking. It simply couldn't. My family was traditional, conventional. This kind of story belonged in a novel, not in our lives. She brought the idea to me, Dad's letter went on. And though I was hesitant, worried about the secrecy, about the judgment, about the complications, I loved your mother more than life itself. Her happiness was everything. So we agreed. We would raise this child as our own, giving them the love and stability they deserved. We kept it a secret, a necessary one, we believed, to protect everyone involved. The ticking of the grandfather clock suddenly sounded like a countdown to an explosion. My eyes darted to David, then to Sarah. David's face was a mask of utter bewilderment, his jaw hanging slightly open. Sarah looked pale, a hand flying to her mouth. Their reactions mirrored my own internal earthquake. This wasn't just a secret. This was a bombshell. Mr. Sterling looked up from the letter, his gaze sweeping over our shocked faces. And so, in the summer of 1978, he read, his voice now a mere whisper in the suddenly suffocating silence of the room, we welcomed our first child into our home. Our eldest, our son, David. The world stopped spinning. A profound, deafening silence descended. David, our David, was adopted. This was impossible. My brother, who looked so much like Dad, with his dark hair and strong jawline. My brother, who had always been the golden boy, the firstborn, the heir to the family business. It was a lie. A cruel, unthinkable lie. David himself seemed to deflate, his face losing all color. He sank back into his chair, looking utterly broken, utterly lost. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The air was thick with the weight of revelation, the shattering of a lifelong truth. My own heart was a tangled mess of emotions, shock, disbelief, a strange surge of protective pity for David, and a growing sense of the unpredictable depths of my father's life. What else had he hidden? And if David was adopted, what about Sarah and me? Mr. Sterling, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift he had just unleashed, calmly placed the first letter down. He picked up the next, its wax seal bearing the same M as the first. He looked at us, his eyes unblinking. This next letter, he said, his voice carrying the full weight of its impending content, is addressed to my daughter, Martha. And that's when I felt the floor drop out from under me. My blood ran cold, a chilling certainty forming in my mind. If David was adopted, and Dad felt the need to tell me something separate, then my own reality was about to be irrevocably altered. What other secret had he been carrying just for me? What truth was waiting to twist my own identity, to redefine everything I thought I knew about my past? I gripped the arms of my chair, bracing myself, not knowing if I was about to find liberation or destruction in my father's final words. My breath hitched in my throat. If David was adopted, and Dad felt the need to tell me something separate, then my own reality was about to be irrevocably altered. What other secret had he been carrying just for me? What truth was waiting to twist my own identity, to redefine everything I thought I knew about my past? I gripped the arms of my chair, bracing myself, not knowing if I was about to find liberation or destruction in my father's final words. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat again, the gentle sound cutting through the ringing in my ears. David sat like a stone statue, his face a ghastly shade of white, eyes staring blankly ahead. Sarah, for once, was utterly silent, her mouth slightly agape, looking from David to me with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The lawyer carefully broke the wax seal, unfolding the cream-colored paper with a reverence that spoke volumes. "My dearest Martha," he began, and the familiar words, spoken in that detached yet resonant tone, felt like a physical blow. "You, my quiet, observant daughter, have always seen more than you let on. You felt the undercurrents, the unspoken truths of our family. I fear this letter will confirm your deepest, unacknowledged suspicions and perhaps inflict a new kind of pain. But you deserve the truth, Martha, more than any of us. I could feel a cold sweat prickling my skin. What suspicions? What pain? My mind raced, trying to grasp at straws, at any memory that could prepare me for this. Nothing. Only the persistent feeling of being an outsider, an observer in my own life, a sentiment I had always attributed to being the middle child. David stirred, a low growl escaping his throat. "This is insane," he muttered, his voice raw and choked. "This is a joke. Dad would never... He wouldn't lie to us like this. Not for 45 years. He looked at me, his eyes wild and desperate. "Martha, tell me this isn't real." I could only shake my head, my own voice trapped somewhere deep in my chest. The truth was unraveling before our very eyes, shredding the fabric of our family history. David, the strong, unshakable patriarch in waiting, was crumbling, and the sight was almost more terrifying than the words themselves. Mr. Sterling waited patiently for a moment, then continued, his voice softer, imbued with Dad's characteristic thoughtful cadence. "When your mother, Eleanor, and I adopted David, it was an act of profound love and desperate hope. We believed he would be our only child. But life, Martha, has a way of surprising you. A few years later, we received an unexpected call. It was from the agency about David's biological mother. She was in an even more desperate situation than before, and she was pregnant again." My breath caught. Pregnant again. The words echoed in my head, a terrifying premonition taking root. David's biological mother? Not just David. This time, Mr. Sterling continued, reading Dad's careful script, she had nowhere to turn. She asked specifically about David, wondering how he was. And then, quietly, she asked if we would consider taking her second child, due in a few months. She said she couldn't bear to give another child to strangers. She wanted them to be together, to have a connection. My vision blurred. A connection. Together. The room began to spin. David's biological mother. A second child. My letter. It was fitting into place with a horrifying, sickening click. "Your mother, Eleanor, didn't hesitate," Dad's letter continued. Her heart was bigger than any fear of gossip or judgment. She saw the chance to fulfill a profound wish, to give David a sibling, a blood relation, someone to share his life with. "And so, Martha, 3 years after David came into our lives, you, his biological sister, joined our family. We raised you both as our own, protecting the secret we believed was for everyone's good." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My chair scraped as I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the large mahogany desk. I stared at Mr. Sterling, then at David, who was now staring at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, mirroring my own shock. David is my brother. My biological brother. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in it, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The quiet resentment, the feeling of being an outsider, the constant striving for approval. It wasn't because I was the middle child. It was because I too was a secret. I was a second chance, a quiet echo of an original loss. My childhood, my entire identity, was built on a beautifully constructed lie. David let out a harsh, guttural cry, pushing himself up from his chair. "No!" he roared, his voice raw with pain and fury. "This isn't true. This is impossible. We look alike because we're brothers, because we're family. Not because some stranger had us both and gave us away like unwanted puppies." He rounded on Mr. Sterling, his face contorted. "You're lying! This whole thing is a lie." Mr. Sterling held up a calm hand. "Mr. Miller, I assure you, these are your father's words. I have the adoption papers, should you wish to see them later. They are perfectly legal and confidential." But David wasn't listening. He was staring at me, his biological sister, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of recognition and betrayal. "Martha," he whispered, his voice trembling. "All this time, you knew?" "Knew?" My voice was a choked gasp, tears finally beginning to stream down my face. "How could I have known, David? I just found out myself. We were both lied to." My anger was a raging torrent, fueled by years of suppressed feelings, now unleashed by this crushing revelation. Our parents built our lives on this charade. What kind of people do that? Sarah, who had been watching in stunned silence, suddenly found her voice. This is unbelievable, she breathed, her face pale. So David and Martha are… And I'm… What about me? Her voice was small, almost childlike, a stark contrast to her earlier histrionics. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. If you've ever felt the ground fall out from under you, realizing your entire life was built on a foundation of lies, you'll understand the dizzying terror that gripped me in that moment. Every memory, every argument, every quiet moment with Dad, it all shifted. The distance, the perceived lack of affection, suddenly it wasn't just my imagination. It was a carefully constructed facade, masking a deep, profound secret. Mr. Sterling, unfazed by the emotional storm brewing around him, calmly placed my letter down. He paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle, a testament to his experience with families and their profound secrets. The grandfather clock ticked on, marking the relentless passage of time, while our past unraveled in agonizing slow motion. And now, Mr. Sterling said, his voice quiet but firm, we come to the final personal letter, addressed to my daughter Sarah. My head snapped up, my gaze locking on Sarah. She looked even more terrified now, her eyes wide as saucers, her hand pressed to her mouth. If David and I were adopted siblings from the same biological mother, what secret could possibly be left for her? The only logical answer, the one that made a cold dread bloom in my stomach, was that Sarah, too, wasn't who she thought she was. Or perhaps she was the only one who was, making her the ultimate outsider in a family built on hidden truths. Mr. Sterling reached for the last cream-colored envelope, its wax seal bearing the familiar M. He broke it, the crisp sound like a gunshot in the silent room. He unfolded the paper, smoothed it, and began to read, his voice taking on an even deeper, more resonant tone, as if sensing the immense weight of these final words. My dearest Sarah, Dad's letter began. You were, in many ways, our miracle. After years of struggling to conceive, after bringing David and Martha into our lives through adoption, your mother and I never truly gave up hope for a biological child of our own. We pursued every avenue, every treatment available, holding on to a sliver of faith. Sarah let out a small, relieved sob, a mixture of validation and fear in her expression. A biological child, of course. This was the reason for her special treatment, for Dad's promises, for the lavish spending. She was the miracle baby. My heart, still reeling from my own revelation, felt a pang of something akin to understanding, even as a bitter resentment began to simmer. And then, a true blessing. Mr. Sterling read on, his voice filled with Dad's relief and joy. Against all odds, after one last desperate attempt, your mother conceived. You, Sarah, were our biological daughter, born when your mother was 38, a testament to her strength and perseverance. Sarah's face, which had been tight with fear, now softened into a triumphant if tearful smile. She shot a quick glance at David and me, a flicker of "I told you so" in her eyes, even amidst the chaos. She had been Dad's favorite. She was their biological child. This, she must have thought, explained everything. But a cold premonition, a dark knot of intuition tightened in my gut. This wasn't the kind of secret Dad had been talking about. This wasn't a mistake he needed to rectify. This felt like a setup. The lawyer's voice had gained a strange, almost regretful quality. There had to be more. Your birth, Dad's letter continued, was the happiest day of our lives. You were cherished, perhaps overly so, as you were proof that our own bloodline could continue. You were our hope for the future. But the joy of your arrival was quickly overshadowed by a devastating truth, one that your mother and I decided, in our grief and our desperate attempt to preserve our family, to keep completely hidden. The triumphal smile vanished from Sarah's face. Her eyes grew wide again, fixed on Mr. Sterling's face. David, slowly regaining some composure, now looked at Sarah with a dawning horror. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just about her birth. This was about after her birth. What could be so devastating, so world-shattering, that it would require such secrecy after the miracle of a biological child? Mr. Sterling paused, taking a slow, deep breath, as if bracing himself for the words he was about to utter. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the mocking tick-tock of the grandfather clock. My heart hammered against my ribs, a terrible dread seizing me. Whatever this was, it was bigger, darker, more shattering than anything we had heard so far. "Sarah," Mr. Sterling read, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "you were indeed our biological daughter. But your mother, Eleanor, suffered severe complications during your birth. Complications from which she never truly recovered. She passed away just 3 months after you were born. Your mother, Martha and David's adopted mother, the woman who loved you all so fiercely, died bringing you into this world." A collective gasp, a strangled cry, ripped through the room. It wasn't just Sarah's secret. It was everyone's, our mother. Our beautiful, kind mother. She hadn't lived a long, full life after having Sarah. She had died. Sarah let out a piercing shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and horror. "No, that's a lie. Mommy was always there. She raised me? She was at all my graduations. She was at my wedding. This is a lie." She scrambled to her feet, knocking her chair over with a crash, her face a mask of disbelief and unimaginable pain. "She sent me cards. She baked me cakes. She was there. She was always there." David and I stared, equally stunned. Our mother had died when Sarah was 3 months old? But that was impossible. We remembered her. We remembered her raising us, her laugh, her quiet strength. We remembered her being there for years. It was the greatest, most profound lie of all. Mr. Sterling looked up, his face etched with a profound sorrow. He pointed a steady finger at the last paragraph of Sarah's letter, his voice barely audible now, filled with a sorrow that transcended mere professional duty. "Your father, Thomas Miller," he read, his voice shaking slightly, in his overwhelming grief and fear, could not bear to lose another child, to break apart the family he had so carefully constructed. He found another, a woman who looked remarkably like your mother, Eleanor. A woman he paid for decades to live as your mother, to raise you, to keep the greatest secret of all. The woman you knew, Sarah, the woman we all knew as Eleanor, was not your birth mother, nor was she David's and Martha's adoptive mother. She was a paid impostor, a stand-in, hired to preserve the illusion of a family that had, in fact, died long ago. The air in the room was sucked out in one horrifying instant. The grandfather clock continued its relentless ticking, a cruel counterpoint to the absolute, shattering silence that descended. My mother, the woman who raised me, the woman I mourned just 2 days ago, was not my mother. The woman in the casket, the woman we laid to rest, the woman we called Mom. She was a stranger. The air in the room was sucked out in one horrifying instant. The grandfather clock continued its relentless ticking, a cruel counterpoint to the absolute, shattering silence that descended. My mother, the woman who raised me, the woman I mourned just 2 days ago, was not my mother. The woman in the casket, the woman we laid to rest, the woman we called Mom. She was a stranger. Sarah, still reeling from the shock of her birth mother's death, now faced a new, even more insidious betrayal. Her piercing shriek morphed into a strangled sob, then a desperate, disbelieving laughter that bordered on madness. No, this is insane. This is a joke. She loved me. She loved me. She wasn't an impostor. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her head, clutching her hair as if trying to hold her shattered world together. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around the room as if searching for an escape from the unbearable truth. David, who had been struggling to process his own adoption, now looked utterly vacant, as if his mind had simply shut down. His face was devoid of color, his eyes glazed over, staring at a point beyond us all. He was a statue carved from ash, the ground having not just fallen out from under him, but atomized, leaving him suspended in a void of disbelief. The golden boy, the confident heir, was gone, replaced by a ghost of a man. My own reaction was a strange, terrifying calm. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that it numbed me. The world had gone silent, save for the frantic beating of my own heart. The woman I had believed to be my mother, the one whose quiet presence had been a constant throughout my life, the source of whatever fleeting affection I received, was a paid actress, a lie. My entire childhood, every memory of her touch, her voice, her advice, was a meticulously crafted fabrication. Dad, in his grief, had not just told a lie. He had built an entire false reality around us, brick by painstakingly placed brick. Mr. Sterling remained impassive, though a deep weariness settled around his eyes, lines of 1,000 other shattered families etched into his face. He reached for a small leather-bound journal that lay beside the letters, its pages worn with the passage of time and the weight of untold stories. "Your father anticipated this reaction," he said, his voice quiet, steady, yet imbued with a profound sadness. "He left a final note, intended for all of you to be read last. It explains his reasons, however flawed they may seem now. It is, perhaps, his ultimate act of love, however misguided." He opened the journal and began to read, his voice heavy with the weight of the confession, the words flowing from the page like a torrent long suppressed. "My children," Dad's final entry began, his elegant script filling the page, stark against the cream-colored paper. "I know this truth will cause you immense pain, perhaps even hatred for me. I ask for no forgiveness, only for understanding. After Eleanor, your true mother, died, a part of me died with her. The world, which had been vibrant and full of promise, turned to ash. I looked at David and Martha, so young, barely 5 and 2 years old respectively, and already having faced the quiet ache of abandonment from their biological mother, and then the unthinkable loss of their adoptive mother. I looked at you, Sarah, a tiny infant, never to know the warmth of your birth mother's embrace, the woman who had fought so hard to bring you into this world." His words painted a picture of a man utterly broken, a man whose stoic exterior had masked an internal landscape ravaged by grief. The distant father I knew had been a man utterly shattered, driven to an act of unimaginable desperation to preserve what little semblance of family he had left. "The thought of raising 3 children alone," the note continued, its words raw and unvarnished, "of shattering their lives further with the news of Eleanor's death, of burdening them with the truth of your adoptions, David and Martha, and the immense tragedy of Sarah's birth. It was unbearable. The weight of it crushed me. I broke. I truly broke. In my despair, I saw only one path, to build a new reality, one where the children believed they had a mother, a constant loving presence, even if I had to manufacture it." He went on to detail the genesis of the deception. "I found a woman named Mary. She was a widow, struggling to keep her own life together after the sudden death of her husband. She bore a striking resemblance to Eleanor, a haunting echo of her smile, the same gentle eyes. I approached her with a proposition that must have seemed scandalous, even monstrous. I asked her to become Eleanor, to live a lie, to raise my children. She was desperate, and I was desperate. She agreed, not for a meager sum, but for a life's wage, a security she could never have dreamed of otherwise. She moved into our home, taking on the role with an almost terrifying commitment," Dad's confession continued. "She studied Eleanor's photographs, learned her stories, her habits, her recipes. She even adopted some of her mannerisms. She learned to answer to Mom, and she loved you, each of you, with a fierce devotion I truly believe was genuine, even if the premise was a lie. She dedicated her life to maintaining my elaborate fiction, for which I will be eternally grateful and eternally ashamed. The cost to her, I realize now, was immense. The cost to you all, far greater than any financial inheritance." The silence that followed was different now, not just shock but a devastating sorrow, for Dad, for his unbearable grief and the impossible burden he had chosen to carry, for Mary, the woman who had sacrificed her identity, her very self for us, for a promise made to a desperate man, and for us, the children who had lived a lifetime within a meticulously constructed illusion, our entire history a carefully staged play. Sarah had collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that racked her entire body. David sat slumped, staring at the floor. The golden boy, the heir, now nothing but a shadow of his former self, his world utterly inverted. I looked at them, my biological brother, and my biological half-sister, bound not by a shared childhood with our true parents, but by a shared colossal deception. The money, the house, the construction company, all the things we had fought over moments ago were utterly meaningless. They were just objects in a world that had suddenly lost all its anchor points, all its perceived truths. "Mr. Sterling," I managed to choke out, my voice hoarse, raw with unshed tears. "What happens now?" He closed the journal, placing it gently on the desk. "That, Martha, is entirely up to you. Your father left no further directives, save for his hope that these truths would eventually bring you peace. He provided evidence, documentation for all these claims, should you ever need them. Adoption papers, death certificates, financial records detailing payments to Mary. They are perfectly legal and confidential. But his true legacy, he believed, was not in the assets, but in the truth. Painful as it is the foundation upon which you can now build something real." We left Mr. Sterling's office that day not as heirs, but as strangers to ourselves and to each other. The usual bickering and resentments that had fueled our interactions for decades were replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The ticking clock in the corner seemed to mock our lost time, the decades lived in the dark. The world outside, bathed in the harsh afternoon light, seemed too bright, too real, too unforgiving for the shattered fragments of our lives. The truth did not bring immediate peace. It brought a hurricane. Weeks blurred into months, months into a turbulent year. We each wrestled with revelations that shook our very identities, challenging every memory, every ingrained belief. David, the embodiment of our father's business acumen and stoic resolve, plunged into a deep depression, the foundation of his self-worth utterly shattered. Grappling with being adopted, with an impostor mother, and a biological sister he never knew, he withdrew, his anger a cold, constant companion. He resented the lies, the stolen past, the decades of unwitting complicity. Sarah's rage was a different beast entirely. It was raw, disorienting, a desperate lashing out at the memory of the woman she had loved as Mom. The discovery of her birth mother's tragic death, followed by the revelation of the impostor, created a profound sense of a stolen childhood, a betrayal that festered. She struggled to reconcile the unconditional love she remembered with the knowledge that it was, in a fundamental sense, an engineered performance. Her tantrums, once theatrical, became truly desperate, reflecting a deep-seated anguish. She isolated herself, unable to process the profound implications of her father's actions. For me, the peacemaker, the invisible one, it was a different kind of reckoning. The pain was immense. The realization that my entire childhood had been a meticulously performed play was devastating. Yet, beneath the grief and the sense of profound loss, there was a strange, undeniable sense of liberation. The quiet unease, the feeling of being an outsider, the constant striving for approval, they suddenly fit together, not into a perfect picture, but into a comprehensible one. The puzzle pieces of my life, once scattered and disparate, now began to form a coherent, albeit fractured image. I understood the nuances of my father's distance, the intensity of his protectiveness, the carefully constructed affection. I began my own quiet quest for answers. I scoured old photographs, interviewed distant relatives who remembered our true mother, Eleanor, piecing together fragments of her vibrant, fierce spirit. It was a strange process of mourning a woman I had never known, whose life had been tragically cut short, while simultaneously grieving the loss of the mother who had raised me. It was a duality of grief, a profound experience of loving and hating a ghost. My search eventually led me to Mary, the impostor. I found her living quietly in a small town upstate, frail and aged, carrying the weight of decades of secrecy. Our meeting was tentative, fraught with unspoken emotion. She was surprised, cautious, but ultimately relieved. For the first time, She spoke openly about her life, her own losses, the impossible choice she had made. She told me stories of Eleanor, piecing together a mosaic of the woman she had impersonated. And then, her voice breaking, she spoke of us. She confirmed everything, her own life a testament to sacrifice and unwavering loyalty to a promise made to a desperate man. The love she had given us, she insisted, was real. "I knew it was a lie, Martha," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "But you were just babies. I couldn't help but love you. You became my children." In that moment, looking into her tearful eyes, I saw not a villain, but a complex, suffering woman, herself a victim of circumstance, caught in my father's web of grief. A profound, aching understanding replaced anger. I didn't forgive her in the traditional sense, but I understood the deep, tragic humanity of her choice. And in understanding, I found a measure of peace. The arguments over the will vanished, replaced by a shared, silent pain. The Miller Construction Company, the old colonial house, the investment portfolio, they eventually sorted themselves out. The financial inheritance shrinking into insignificance compared to the wreckage of our lives. The money, once the source of so much contention, felt like blood money, tainted by the lies, overshadowed by the profound emptiness they represented. It has been 2 years since that day in Mr. Sterling's office. David, Sarah, and I are slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. We are still a family, albeit one forged in deception, now struggling to find a new, authentic bond. We visit each other, not out of obligation, but out of a shared understanding of our fractured past, a quiet recognition of the profound secrets that bind us. We talk, openly and honestly, for the first time in our lives. There are still arguments, still raw wounds, but beneath it all, there is a burgeoning respect, a tentative love. We are learning to love each other not as the children of Eleanor and Thomas Miller, but as Martha, David, and Sarah, 3 siblings, bound by blood, adoption, and a shared, traumatic awakening. The lilies that once scented Mr. Sterling's office still haunt my memory, their cloying sweetness replaced by a different aroma now, the bitter scent of truth, slowly yielding to the fragrance of healing. My father's greatest legacy wasn't the wealth he left behind, but the painful, liberating truth he withheld for so long. It was the hardest gift he could have given, but perhaps the only one that truly mattered. It wasn't perfection, but it was real. And in that reality, I found a quiet, empowering peace.